Welcome, everyone. How's everyone doing tonight? Great. Thank you for coming out for probably the first cold evening we've had all long. So sorry about that. We hope you're toasty under the heaters, but we're really happy to have you all here. My name is Curry Sautner. I'm the president and CEO here at Eastern State, and we're really excited to host you for this Justice 101 on restorative justice, understanding the practice, understanding how it works, and the impact and implications. This is a part of our Justice 101 series that looks at the justice system from our historical foundation, which we're sitting in, to the modern implications and engagement in our society. So we are excited about this conversation. We're excited about these amazing panelists that I have before me. I am unbelievably personally thrilled because so much of the restorative justice work happens throughout our entire system. And we are all here as learners to understand how it works, how we can engage in it as community members, and how we really spread the word about how it affects us at all different stages of our life and in our experiences. So welcome all for being here. Thank you so much for being here. I'll do a quick introduction of these two brilliant minds I have beside me. Number one, Suzanne Esterel. She is here from the Commonwealth Victims Advocate. She's a victims advocate attorney with over 30 years of legal experience, including 15 years of legal advocacy serving survivors of crime in Pennsylvania. Her years at the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape as the legal director have brought an understanding of trauma endured by victims and the insight into ways in which the systems created in the justice system can protect victims, but also how they can re-traumatize them. Thank you so much for being here and lending your voice to our understanding.
It's my pleasure.
And next we have Felix Rosario. We are so happy to have you here tonight. You are the program manager of Healing Futures, a youth restorative justice division program with the Youth Art and Self-Empowerment Project. And you teach restorative justice at Chestnut Hill College, which is an amazing, powerful school and amazing location. In 2022, Felix narrowly escaped death by incarceration, known to most of us as life without parole, via a governor clemency after 27 years inside. He has co-founded Let's Circle Up, a restorative justice education project, and wrote Justice from the Inside Up, a restorative justice education facilitator's manual. We are so happy to learn from you tonight. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having me.
Can we give them a big round of applause? So I want to welcome everybody here to Eastern State Penitentiary Historic Site, and I also want to welcome the hundreds of people that we have online. Welcome to you as well. Throughout the program and towards the end, I will be taking questions from everybody in the room and also those online. So when you see me checking my text messages, it's actually questions coming from our team online. And I'm going to try my best to make sure that I don't ask you the 32 million questions that I have for you both, but we let the audience ask these questions as well. So let's dive into it. And Suzanne and I were talking earlier about when people talk about restorative justice, there's a lot of different connotations that they have in their head of what it is, what it looks like, what it sounds like. And what I would love is kind of a framing and a foundation from the both of you of what is restorative justice practices and what is the language we should use around that. Either one can go first.
Okay, I'll start with, I believe restorative justice is a victim-centered, collaborative approach to addressing harms that recognizes the needs of both those who have been harmed and those who have caused the harm, and looks for ways to find solutions that bring restoration. What does it look like to fix those harms or to provide a space for healing that not just centers on what the victim needs, but what the offender needs and what the community needs as a whole. And when we recognize how both sides are such a big part of our society, that it's something that we have to do together, then that recognition helps us to build safer, caring communities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Restorative justice, I would say, is a way of doing justice that seeks to heal harm by involving those who were directly impacted by it, including those who caused it. As Fania Davis likes to say, also it is a pre-colonial, pre-slavery, pre-genocide way of doing justice. And it's also important to, well, first of all, to put it in that context, but it's important to also think about what it is not. It's not primarily about forgiveness. That's a common misperception that people have. Forgiveness is often an outcome of restorative justice, or at least more so than it happens in the criminal punishment system, but it's not the goal. The goal is to arrive at a better understanding of the harm that occurred and to try to find a good way forward that benefits everyone. It's also not a way of evading accountability. Uh, we've been conditioned to see prisons as synonymous with accountability. But as someone who spent 27 years inside of one, I can tell you that it is the antithesis of accountability. You can spend days, years, decades inside a cage and never once have to think about the harm you caused, let alone do something about it.
Felix, I'm going to follow up with that really quickly. The word that I kept seeing and reading in the research around this is also around healing. So would you say it's not about forgiveness, but it's also about healing? Or what are the other language terms that is the outcomes that happen when you're doing restorative practices correctly?
Healing is definitely one outcome. Sitting across from the person who harmed you, or if you're the person who was harmed, sitting across the other way. If you're the person who caused the harm, sitting across from the person who you harmed can be really transformative. Having the opportunity to hear about the impact of that harm firsthand from the person who experienced it, getting understanding about why it happened, can allow you to move forward in a way that incarceration does not allow you to move forward from. It keeps everyone trapped in that moment of time when the harm happened, years later, decades later. So this is an opportunity to actually ask questions that would never get answered in the courts, and get honest answers. Restorative justice is about truth telling. It creates a safe, authentic space where people can be honest about what happened and what their feelings are around what happened, as opposed to the system that punishes truth telling and incentivizes deceit at every turn. From the moment the cuffs get slapped on, from watching any of the primetime propaganda dramas that if you start opening your mouth and telling the truth, you're going to find yourself in a lot of trouble. So you stay quiet, you say someone else did it, you minimize your role, you do whatever you have to do to evade punishment. And what happens is people internalize those alternate narratives and continue to live them out for years and years and years. This gives people an opportunity to be honest and say, this is what happened, and I'm sorry. And also do something about it. Restorative justice is about action. It's about creating a plan that the responsible person needs to then do to put things, as we like to say in restorative justice, more right.
Fantastic. And the idea that the system is created in a way to protect, but at the same time causes so much more harm through the process is powerful, but also really makes you question, how do we set up this structure? And then how's that structure working today in the courts? And we'll dive into that in a minute. But Suzanne, I'd really like to hear kind of for the victim, and you work so often with the victims, what is that healing process and path for the victims in restorative justice?
I have to say that there is no one path. For as many different victims that you have, you'll have many different paths toward healing. But I think restorative justice opens the door to kind of find what that pathway might be for an individual. When you think about the court process, and the victim is not the center of that process. Even the way the cases are listed, it's the state against the offender. It's not the victim against the offender, it's the state. So the victim just kind of serves as a witness, if that, in the process. So often when you think about how disruptive crime might be for a particular victim, I kind of like to think about it like if you think of a 1,000-piece puzzle, you have all these pieces that you're putting together, and then a crime happens. It's like somebody takes out one of the pieces. You can't get your puzzle fixed right because there's this missing piece. And what happens with restorative justice is that because it's in many restorative justice programs create an environment that it's smaller and it is victim centered, and the victim has the opportunity to discuss what matters to them. So it's not necessarily what might happen in the court process, but what the victim wants to know, like why, how, when. Some questions that just are not part of the normal criminal justice process that the victims feel like, if I could just figure out this. And oftentimes, especially when you think about homicide and gun violence, some things cannot be restored. But if some people can get an answer to a question that's been plaguing them, then that's how healing comes through restorative justice for victims.
Thank you so much. And the idea of gaining information and gaining control back into the situation where you may not have any control over in the past, it has to be key. Around that, though, when we think about this system, as we have somebody that has caused harm, somebody that is harmed, there's so many other players in that. So one of the key pieces, and could you help me understand how community is involved in this? Because it's not just two people. It is a small unit, but how does this work? And then also, Felix, I'd love to understand, you touched upon the historical narrative of where these ideas come from. I'd love to see how it works with a larger community, and then how does it work? What's the historical reference point for where these ideas came from?
I think we're in a place where we're starting to see more and more involvement in restorative justice. So you might think about school-based incidents where then you're not just dealing with that individual person who was harmed and the person who caused harm, but the larger like school community, just for an example, who are impacted as a result of that harm. If there's a shooting at school and you think of the number of people who are impacted by that harm, whether it be teachers and staff, all the students, the parents of the children who go there, and then you create a restorative justice type, whether it's a healing circle or a different program that a school may provide, where you're allowing all those people to come in and to participate and give voice, giving voice to how you were harmed, giving voice to what trauma you felt by what happened, and what healing looks like for you is a big part of restorative justice. Providing that space for a person to gain back some empowerment or some control from what they've lost by being victimized is an important piece of the puzzle. So I think there's various ways where restorative justice can be used, and the designs can be different. And we have to be willing to be open and creative because communities are different. And the people who are in the community are often the ones who can speak best as to what is going to be appropriate healing for this community. So finding space for people to be able to do that, to address the harms and provide accountability so that everybody feels like this isn't your issue, this isn't their problem, but this is us together deciding what community means to us and what healing and wholeness means to us and how we value it, and then how we want to move forward because of those values.
Yeah. In terms of the historical context, restorative justice is a old/new way of doing justice, right? The term restorative justice came about in the early 70s, and a lot of the practices we now see emerge from that movement, but it's derived from native and indigenous traditions that go back millennia, and like this penitentiary we're sitting in right now was erected in 1829, and yet it's so hard for us today to think outside of the prison context when we're thinking about justice. And this has only been around 2.5 centuries, but even before that, there were other, systems that this is derived from, Jim Crow, lynching, convict leasing, all the way back to slavery. I mean, there's a direct line through all those things, and the direct line is white supremacy. So it's like really hard to have a conversation about, ending this or alternatives without really being honest about what this is really about. So involving community is essential. I know in the restorative justice circles I do through my job at Healing Futures, we invite a couple community members to each of our restorative justice processes. We have the person who committed the harm and a supporter of theirs, the person harmed and a supporter of theirs, and a couple community members alongside with 2 Healing Futures facilitators to sit in circle and talk about what happened and work out the plan. But that piece is really important to us because you're right. It's never about the person who caused the harm and the person who experienced the harm alone, right? Harm affects everyone. It affects and destroys entire communities. So while these harms are happening between individuals, it's taking place in a context laden with harm, right? Harm has been done to them. No one's introduction to violence is really committing it. It has been done to them at some point, whether by other people or systems, right? So all of these issues need to be addressed and need to be addressed in community. And there has to be buy-in from community so that restorative justice can spread. And so there needs to be education about it because most people have never heard of it. They think, that cops' cages and courtrooms are the only way to do things. But it's only because they don't know of anything else. So there has to be education. People have to be able to see, okay, this is happening, it's working, it's getting better results. And the more that happens, the more community can get involved and also benefit from restorative justice practices.
And I appreciate you opening that box and that door a little bit wider about the impacts. And it's not this one thing that, like a light switch, fixes everything, that we have to look at the entire system of who's been harmed and who needs to heal and the layers beyond that as well. I do find it's fascinating that we as a society are constantly looking for reform and at the same time looking back millennial to say, what was the way of healing in the past? How did we come together as a community and bring each other in and pull in instead of push out and isolate and other? There is a bit of me that wonders if our country as a whole needs a giant circle restorative practices. But really thinking through about what are the layers and how do you unpack that system. And at the same time, we're sitting in a place that tried to had lots of issues with it, but the intent was to reform the punitive practices. And you're reforming the punitive practices because as humans, we see human dignity in other people. At least we hope we see human dignity in other people. But at the same time, the other side of it's not working. So what are some of the outcomes of restorative practices other than healing? What is the success rate on something like recidivism? Do we have an impact on how it works to heal people so they have a successful life?
Well, in terms of recidivism, which I hate as the metric for success, but it's one, that everyone wants to look at. My program has had one rearrest of a young person who has successfully completed the program, and that's out of over 40 in the 3-year history of the program. I believe that when people sit across from someone who they harmed, look them in their eye and recognize their humanity and hear about that impact firsthand, that they're less likely to do it again. I truly do. But I'm also well aware that one restorative justice process is not going to solve all the problems that people are experiencing, all the hardships people are experiencing, all the oppression, like we know what drives crime. It's poverty, it's inequity, it's, lack of hope, it's poor schools, it's lack of healthcare, all the things, right? And so until we fix those problems, and we have the resources to, it's not a matter of, scarcity, because we see billions of dollars flying overseas to fund wars and all kind of things, but if people's needs were met, we'd see less of this harm happening out here. But in the meantime, it is important to address interpersonal harm between people to make sure that it doesn't continue happening. And I truly believe and have seen that restorative justice makes an impact there.
Thank you. Suzanne, did you want to add to that about the impact that the process can have on helping people heal for long term?
Right. I think it can be very impactful, but like I said, because victims are different, different victims have different outcomes and experience the process differently. I know with our victim offender dialogue program, what we do with victims and persons that are incarcerated who have harmed others, it's at the victim's selection that they want to participate in the program. It's a very facilitated program. They spend time preparing both the victim and the offender for the meeting and the discussion. And we see outcomes across the spectrum where immediately kind of after the conversation, victims feel that there's been this healing, oftentimes forgiveness. Or some people just feel like, hey, they got their questions answered and that's all they were looking for. So I wish that we had more staff that we could commit to the program so that we could be doing it more and more often, because it does really seem to be helpful. But like you were saying, Felix, I think we just have to go even beyond that. What we hear from almost every victim is like the most important thing that they want is for what happened to them never to happen to anyone else. So to make that a reality, we need to be starting way before we're at this process where something needs to be restored. And the concepts are very similar. If we start looking at what are the needs and whose responsibility is it to meet those needs? Like what, as a community, how do we create hope for people who are hopeless? And why do we expect something different from children that we see that are hopeless? We should be expecting them to commit crimes if we're not going to provide any other opportunities for hope and for them. They can be something that they dream of that's positive. But until we do that, we start realizing that that is my responsibility. I am my brother's keeper. Then we're going to be here at the back end trying to fix what we could fix at the front end.
Fantastic. That is unbelievably powerful. Will always remind me of Langston Hughes and the ability to dream. That if we don't have the ability to dream as a child or as an adult, we can't see where the hope and where the future will come to. And that around that idea that you have to be able to survive in a way that's thriving to be able to dream for a different future. When we think about restorative practices, there is always this worry in people's minds about victims being re-traumatized. What in your work have you done to ensure that it is a healing process? What are the safeguards or guardrails that you put up?
Well, like we say, the process is always victim-centered. So the victim is at the center of what's happening. We use the tools to make sure that they feel empowered, that they feel heard, that they have the opportunity to make choices. So if at any stage a victim decides this is not what they want, then we honor that. And we allow them to make those choices so that it does feel safe and it does feel like a healing process. Now, healing can sometimes be painful and difficult. So we have those discussions as well. Like, if this is difficult and painful, do you want to continue? Do you want to work through that? What does that look like? Do they have an outside therapist that is providing some professional assistance as they go through the process? So we try to make sure that we address all those. And then we're also listening for feedback. When someone comes and says, you did this, that, or the other, and that wasn't cool, then we pay attention to that to make sure that we make changes so that we are not in the space where we are re-traumatizing or re-offending people in any way. So it's a lot of listening to understand. And sometimes it's not just to what's being heard, but listening to understand what the person means by what they are saying.
And that's really difficult for people because it's also like trying to articulate something that you might not have the language for, or the emotional ability to kind of articulate past that. So at the same time, how do you ensure that you're not creating further harm on the person that has caused harm? What are the safeguards that go around the person that's caused harm?
Well, in our program, the facilitators meet with that person as well. So, and it's not like, one meeting, it's a lengthy process to make sure that the person feels like they are ready to go through the process. And like I said, either person can opt out and say, this is too much for me, I don't want to do it. But with the advocates speak with the offenders on numerous times. They go through some of the possibilities, what this might look like, what it's not going to be. Like, we instruct the offenders that you don't go to this looking that you're going to say, I'm sorry, and the person's going to get up and give you a hug and it's going to be all good. That may happen, but that might not happen. And we talk about what expectations are, what may not be a reasonable expectation, and how is this going to sit with you when your expectations may not be met. And then we also, the Department of Corrections, they're doing quite a bit to try to get successful reentry and services inside the institution. So we also make sure that that person who's going through the process has someone inside the institution that is providing them with those types of therapy and counseling services so that they are ready for whatever that process might look like, or if they are deciding, hey, no, I can't participate in this process.
It's perfect because there's so much of what happens and the healing happens after you walk out of the room. After you go through and have that time to go through and relive and rethink and put all the pieces together. Now, Felix, you were talking about it briefly earlier, and I really think it's unbelievably important, this concept of the circle. And I know that sounds superficial sometimes, but the idea that you're looking eye to eye, that you're hearing each other directly, that you're in a small circle. I mean, you can see this echo through human history. There is something about having nothing in front of you and staring across at somebody else and listening to each other and watching their body language that is so unbelievably informative to the human brain to help understand storytelling, story sharing, and that healing process. So can you walk people through how do you physically set this up to make that emotional healing actually happen?
Well, circle is one common restorative justice practice. Victim offender dialogue is another, and there are a few others as well. Circle, I believe, brings in more perspectives, more people. It's not just a conversation between the person harmed and the person responsible for the harm. And it's a practice that is derived straight from indigenous traditions. This is how people used to transform conflict and heal harm and make decisions and build community, many, 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 many years ago. And there's something powerful about sitting in a circle where there's no person in the front, there's no person above, no person below. Everyone is in an equal position. And there are some ceremonial elements of the circle. It's opened in what's known as a good way, with some kind of poetry reading or song or moment of silence, something that grounds everyone, some breathing perhaps. And then there's a centerpiece that the participants can help create together. So people might be asked to bring something important to them to the circle. Those items get placed in the center. And so it serves as something that grounds the space and gives people something to focus their attention on throughout the process, something positive. And there's a talking piece, an item that gets passed from person to person. And everyone who holds it is invited to speak, and everyone else is asked to listen with respect. And what this does is it slows down the pace of the conversation, and it eliminates cross-talking, people talking over one another, interrupting one another. Because if someone says something across the circle that creates some kind of reaction from you and you want to respond right away, you have to wait until the talking piece arrives at you. And by that time, you might not feel the same way. You might want to say something else. You've had time to think. So it slows down the pace of the conversation. And, you know, people have an opportunity to share wholeheartedly without the rush of, you know, time limits and constraints and all those things. So, I mean, it's quickly become my preferred restorative justice process. I think I enjoy it the most of all of them because it's really community based, and it's a space of equality. And there aren't many spaces like that in our society. Everything is, for the most part, some version of a hierarchy. And, you know, this does away with all of that.
Fantastic. It is unbelievable how much it changes the patterns of your brain and how you can understand and listen, just being able to look at each other with those eyes to eyes in that level, and also have the ability to hold on to that mic and hold on to that emotion for a minute and let the community sit in it. So it is a powerful tool. And when we think about these powerful tools that are on the other side of the justice system, like the court hearing, like the jury trial, that we're seeing very little of anymore, which in some ways was your community hearing what you did and how they want to understand what your actions were. We're not seeing that anymore. We're seeing plea bargains. We're seeing so little where we're in a community with each other talking about action. So how are we seeing restorative justice take a hold of the justice system? Are we seeing, you said it really started to get that name and get that movement in the 1970s, but is it moving along into taking action to change the system that we have? Or are we seeing kind of energy around it in this country?
Well, you know, the
Wah, wah.
restorative justice emerged as an attempt to like fill what it perceived as gaps in the criminal punishment system. And in some ways, it works alongside of it. My program, for example, is a diversion program. We get our referrals from the district attorney's office here in Philadelphia of young people who've been arrested, and we guide them through our process, and we guide the people harmed through our process, bring them together, work it out. Charges get diverted. I mean, charges get dismissed at the end, and it's as if the young people were never arrested, and they can go on with their lives, hopefully, happily, and successfully without the stain of a criminal record or the trauma of having spent any time inside a cage. I try not to look at restorative justice as an alternative to the criminal punishment system, because it legitimizes the system a little too much, in my opinion, to do that. You know, this is a system that exists through this narrative. And at the center of the narrative is this idea that there are these monstrous others who are capable of extreme harm and aren't capable of feeling harm, and who we need to do everything in our power to keep ourselves and our children away from, right? As long as that narrative continues to go uninterrupted, the system is going to continue to thrive. And what restorative justice does is it breaks that story, and it allows you to see the other person as a human being. And when you see someone as a human being, you are no longer okay with treating them however you want to, or allowing someone else to treat them however they want to in your name. So yeah, I mean, there has to be a complete overhaul of the system and of how we think, right? Like there has to be an appetite from the public to change this. And reform isn't going to do it, you know, trimming a sentence here or there, making making a little change that might change back in a few years when the political winds start to shift again. That's never going to result in the kind of change that we really need, and that is going to make our communities healthy. So I'm always from the perspective of, we need to be doing this more, and we need to be doing it in our communities. I envision a world where people are doing restorative justice without the system being involved at all. When people have places they can go to in their community when conflict arises and have restorative processes available to them. Because, right now, when a harm occurs, there are two options: call the cops or do nothing. And I hope it doesn't come as a surprise to anyone sitting here or anyone watching at home, but the vast majority of people who experience harm do nothing. So the system that purports to be the savior and the protector and all that isn't even doing a good job of that in terms of numbers.
I think it's really powerful that you bring up this idea that like we're founded on this idea of the social contract theory, that we have a theory that we come together as people, we give government some of our power and it's supposed to protect us. But in all reality, to have a safe and supportive community, that really the social contracts is between neighbors, it's between each other, and really trying to understand what is the role of the government and do we want them to play that role and do we give them our power to play that role? Suzanne, in your experience with restorative justice and the work that you've been doing, how have you seen it changed over time and what direction do you think it's going into?
I haven't seen major changes except as it relates to juveniles. I think I do see a lot more opportunities for juveniles to be involved in the programs like you described, but we don't see that on the adult level at all. So other than, because like I said, the program that we're doing is not a like an alternative sentencing or anything like that. It's just kind of addressing some of those harms that we know the sentence is not addressing. So it's kind of in addition to the punitive system that the person is already in. They just have this opportunity, if they would like to participate in this process, that they can do that. But it's not a substitute or an alternative that the system or the justice system is ascribing to in any way.
Thank you. I think one of the things that we do here at Eastern State, and it's a part of our new values that our team has collected, is about taking action. And that means that through our programs and through our visitation and through our staff, that it's not just about having conversations and learning. We think that's key to really understanding, building awareness around it, but also kind of saying, what's the next step for every single one of us to take to create a society that we are proud of, that we want to live in, that we believe our family members are safe in. So are there any organizations that you two, and then we're going to go to audience questions, I promise. Are there any organizations other than yours, Felix, that you really think that people should dive into, maybe learn more about, even volunteer at?
Yes, I mean, one of my favorite parts of the job is getting out in the community and meeting all these amazing people and organizations who are doing incredible work, unspoken work that you would never see on the news, you know. But there's a lot going on out here that people can get involved in. I mean, I would just do a search, but in terms of restorative justice, there's a larger movement called Restorative Cities that's attempting to create restorative hubs in every neighborhood across Philadelphia. There's another youth restorative justice diversion program called Collective Climb that does similar work as Healing Futures. And I mean, there needs to be more. I wish I could keep going on naming more and more restorative justice efforts out here. But Community College of Philadelphia has a restorative justice certificate program that's about to launch in January, spring semester. Hopefully more people get people get involved in that and, figure out ways to use that certification to start new programs or to get involved with already existing ones. But yeah, I mean, it depends what you're specifically interested in working on or doing, because there's so many issues and so many problems that need to be addressed. And there are just so many different organizations trying to, address many different problems. So it all depends on like what we're interested in and what we're passionate about. But if the passion is there, there's work to do.
Excellent. Suzanne, do you want to add any there too?
Yeah, I would just add, I'm not going to add a particular program, but there are lots, especially in Philadelphia. There's a lot of programs. But I don't know if you're familiar with the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And the study says that all one child needs to change the trajectory of their life is one caring adult. So my charge to everyone who asks, what can they do? I say, be somebody's one caring adult. And I mean, if everybody commits to do that, just imagine how much farther along we could be and the changes that we could make.
That is fantastic. We have a justice education collaboratory of educators around the country, a lot of them who are on tonight. One of them who's in the back of the room, go ahead, wave now, and there we go. And so the idea of always thinking about schools is the role of belonging in our community, the role of belonging in our schools, and that one caring adult, both in school and out, but also how schools become restorative justice hubs. How does that happen, and how do they work with the community to restore that compassion and healing from the classroom to the parents and to the community? A couple of questions from our online viewers, and then I'm more than happy to take some from our on-site viewers. Betsy asks, what are your thoughts on the new rehabilitation prison systems like Little Scandinavian at SCI Chester? Any thoughts on that? Betsy.
I haven't seen it personally, but I have heard very positive feedback about it. That and I mean, if it is as described, like I said, because I did not see it personally, but if it is as described, it's better than what is most places. I think anything that can be done to make the system more humane and to treat people as they are people, because that's what justice is all about. Justice is requiring that each person be treated as a person because they are a person, that we don't get to like treat you as something less than a person when you're a person. So I think that some of these alternative systems kind of have that motto or that method in mind, where that these are people and we're going to treat them like people, even though there is this arc of punishment, that they can still be treated like real people.
I'm well familiar with the program at SCI Chester. Scandinavian countries have a different philosophy when it comes to justice. They see people as full humans with inherent dignity, and their system looks to reintegrate the person back into society the day that they walk into it. That's their goal. That's their mission. America has a whole different mission. They have a stated mission, but then they have the true mission. I'm all for improving conditions, but I will say this. They have. I mean, incarceration has moved in different directions since this place opened up in the early 19th century. They've call it like more humane, like I hear that a lot, but just more time out of the cell, TVs, you know, right? All these different things. But, you know, the sentencing has also increased alongside those, you know, new privileges, if you will, uh, disproportionately, right? So I actually used to say this when I was inside. I used to say I would go back to Eastern State Penitentiary conditions if there was an end to it at some point, because sentencing wasn't always the way it is right now. You know, I would trade that in a heartbeat. So yeah, I mean, let's make things better for people inside, uh, but let's bring it to an end at some point. You know, let's you don't have to sentence people to decades to prove whatever it is that the system is trying to prove. That can be achieved. The same aim can be achieved in a few years. Uh, you know, so that program was supposed to be a model that was to then spread. I mean, it's been a lot of years. I'm not sure how long now. It hasn't spread. It's contained to this one unit in one prison, and you know, yeah. So you know, I know it was the former DLC secretary's like pet project. You know, he really wanted to get it off and all this, but he's no longer there. Who knows what's going to happen with it? But you know, those guys like they get to cook their own meals, and you know their doors remain open a little more. In the countries that this model, you know, came from, you know, people actually like lock their own door and go to work and, you know, make a living wage and buy their own food, and they're learning how to live in society while they're in there. This program doesn't necessarily achieve that at all.
And typical, the longest sentence here at the time when it was opened was around 2 years. So just like talking about the sentencing. So can we would you mind going to the question right in the back? Thanks, Damon. We'll let that question go, and then we have a couple more online.
Hi. Thank you both for being here today, and for moderating. And I have a question for our victim advocate about the Victim Offender Dialogue Program, which is the program through which someone who's incarcerated is able to have a dialogue with the person who was harmed or a registered victim. I am aware of a woman who is a registered victim, a person harmed, and wants to have a restorative dialogue through the victim offender dialogue process, but has been told by the Office of Victim Advocate that the wait is up to a year, which is so upsetting to her because she doesn't know where her life is going to be in a year. She wants to have the conversations now. It's just very traumatizing. So I'm wondering, I mean, are you aware of this long wait? I'm wondering if your office is committed in any way to closing that gap so that people can be connected to the services they want to have in this victim-centered approach. And if your office is doing anything to try to get funding to actually recruit people and sustain this program in a way that actually, you know, it seems to serve its intended goal.
Yeah, sure. Yes, yes, and yes. We are aware, actually it was COVID that kind of set us on the backlog. So we have been catching up since then. We have kind of revamped a process to use volunteer facilitators. And there's going to be a training that happens with it's not just anyone can volunteer, but they're victim advocates that work on in other agencies and not necessarily our agency who are willing to volunteer to be facilitators. So we do have a training starting for that in January, and then we hope to be able to move people through the process a little more. I don't know the case for the particular victim that you mentioned, but sometimes the waiting does have to do with the offender not wanting to participate at is not that okay? Great. Okay. Yeah. So they should see that after January when we have the training and new facilitators coming on board to help assist us with it. We should be able to reduce that substantially. It's our hope. And we are always looking for funding and seeing if there's ways that we can add to our staff so that we can better serve, because we are serving the entire state.
So is there anything we can do on that front by calling our representatives? Sorry, just to put it back on us, Liz.
That would be great if people want to do that. I'm not sure, budget wise, how effective that would be, but we certainly would appreciate any and all of the support that we can get. We have currently we have a staff of 32 people. Like I say, we serve the entire state, and we have over 65,000 active registered victims. So it is quite a bit of work. And if you feel like there is something that a different reach out to this person, I'd be happy to discuss that with you. But that's kind of where we are.
So one of the other questions that's come in is around technology, and that question just kind of people move this up in the line is like, how are we using technology to do some of this work? Because it is a pretty large state. And are there other ways we talk so much about being one-on-one, being in person, being around a circle, but are there other ways that technology can be advancing restorative justice practice? Or maybe it's even the outcomes, how we're measuring the outcomes of it as well.
I'm sure technology could be used, but most of the victims, they don't want it. When we offer like, hey, this could be done by Zoom, they don't want it. They want to be face to face. But I'm sure there's probably other parts of technology maybe that we could implement. Like, I don't know, maybe another year we could do the facilitator training by Zoom or something like that. But as far as the actual meeting, we have not been able to convince victims, and not that we're trying to convince them, but when we make the offer, even providing comment before the parole board, most people want to come in person, no matter how long their distance is. And the Zoom is an option. They still want to travel and come in person to make that statement and to be heard. So.
Makes sense. Samuel writes in, recently, we have finally been finding ways to give voice to incarcerated individuals, but some see this as a zero-sum game for the voices of those who are victims of crimes. How do we strike the balance and/or help people understand that giving voice to one does not automatically silence others?
What's the person's name?
Sam.
Sam. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear more about what he means by we're finally giving voice to incarcerated people. Without that context, it's like really hard to answer that question.
Yeah, and I definitely think Sam has been on some questions before, so I will try to jump to an understanding. I think one of the things that we have heard from people asking questions is you're always taking one side. And so much about restorative practices is about hearing all voices and ensuring that all voices are healing each other. So how can we help people understand that it is so important to hear all voices in that conversation?
I think it's important that we make sure that the process is victim-centered. I know that we hear that from, we hear some victims say that they don't want to hear anything about restorative justice, and that if this person did this to the person that I love, then they should be locked up forever. So we try to create space to like, okay, I heard that, honor that, but in the larger scheme of things, we're in the same world. We're in the same communities. We have to find ways, healthy, whole ways to live together. And that's going to take realizing that your voice is important, but so is this other person's voice is important as well. And finding space to hear both voices without the measurement of my say is more important than your say it's challenging, but letting people kind of come to terms with that, and people have to come to terms with that on their own. Like I never feel like it's my place to tell somebody that you have to hear this. If they're not ready to hear it, then they're not ready to hear it, and don't hear it. But for the larger community, being all of us, we have to find ways to realize that we are so interconnected that we can't just do one and not do the other and think that we're going to be whole, because we can't be whole like that. We have to give space for both to what are the needs of both of these people? And still, how do we then provide to address the harms? How do we make sure there is accountability? And then how do we move forward in spaces that are safer? And I think we can only do that when we hear from both.
Yeah,
you.
the victim offender binary, and those are two labels I try to refrain from as much as possible, is so essential to the criminal punishment system that it would collapse without it. It needs a person who's on this side and a person who's on this side. But what I've learned through my work is that it's not always that clear. It can get really messy. When we start talking to people and hearing the stories about what happened, it turns out that, the other person had something to do with what happened to them. It wasn't just an isolated incident. And sometimes in some of our circles, the person harmed ends up offering an apology of their own to the responsible youth because of the complexities around what happened and how it wasn't so cut and dry. So the people harmed and the responsible people are in the same community, suffering from the same systemic harms. They're sometimes in the same household, so violence and the system on top of violence does a good job of separating us, of making us hate each other and see each other as the problem or the enemy. And restorative justice tries to bring people together and to give us opportunities to see that we're alike in a lot of ways. We have the same goals. We want the same things. So sitting across from someone, really helps to break that binary down, to see each other as fully human, and to give us a way forward as fully human.
I think that was a perfect way to wrap it up and also perfectly on time. So I really appreciate this. And it's unbelievable for all of us. I'm so happy we did this conversation. We're absolutely going to do it again and again, because I think exposure to this understanding and this idea and that it isn't simple. It is complex. It is gray. It is very complicated, but we need to break down the othering and the binary. And I think back to you, Suzanne, your words you said multiple times tonight, this is the only way we can be whole. And that is a part of who we are as a community and who we are together. It's us all in it together. So how do we work through this system and really build each other up? So I cannot thank you both enough, but I think we should all give them a big round of applause. Thank you all so much. And on the 19th of this month, Mark Lackley is going to have an opening of his new exhibit here at Eastern State. We all welcome you to join us online wherever you are in the country, and in person if you can come back. That's next Tuesday, the 19th. We'll send it out to everybody who's joined us today. And please, all the great resources that were shared today, we'll also do a follow-up email so you can get all the great resources that we base the questions off of, as well as the great resources